Anime Last Stand recently got hit with a JJK update, which brought some of the strongest units we've ever seen before. So I thought I'd make a tier list video talking about the strongest units in the game right now, so you know which ones you should go for. Keep in mind this video is entirely my opinion, and I'd like to know what you think in the comments down below. Anyways, let's get into it. Alright, so I've got the list here, and I'll be ranking units in these 5 categories: Meta Hill, Meta Ground, Amazing, Decent, and Farms. I think these are pretty self-explanatory, and I want to say again that every unit I'll be ranking on this list is meta or among the best in the game in some way, which I'll explain more when I rank them. So yeah, if a unit is not on this list, they are kind of just falling off or can be outshined by people on this list. So I'm sorry if you have glitched on someone that's not on here. It makes you sad, but this is all my opinion, so let me know in the comments what you think. Anyways, to start us off, let's get the farms out of the way. I'm going to start by saying the best farm in the game is almost always going to be Businessman Yojin. He just makes the most amount of money and is very easy for story mode and infinite mode. Otherwise, Idol is the second best with her range buff and should really only be used in infinite. And then Speed Cart is probably the worst out of all these 3 meta farms. Speed Cart is just kind of falling off, and you might as well just use Yojin in almost every case. Moving on, we've got some Black Clover units. So starting with Yami, he's going to go into the meta ground tier. So Yami is a dark line AoE unit. He is pretty cheap and has among the best DPS in the game, but he is only ground. That's his only fallback, so he's going into the ground tier, but he is definitely meta for ground units. Next we've got Yuno, or I think his name is Windprint. This unit can be very good in some cases. He is pretty much a stronger version of Tatsumaki, but he is also a more expensive one, which means he can't really be placed down in the first few waves, which is why Tatsumaki was good in the first place. I think this unit is pretty situational, but overall is pretty amazing. Hollow Ichigo is a meta hill unit. He is one of the best supports in the game with both the Fear and Cripple passive. Both are very good slowdowns, and he also has some really good damage and a huge AoE size for being a hybrid support. Noelle is a hybrid water unit, but there's nothing really special about her. She doesn't have a passive, she is only a circle AoE, and her damage isn't the best of the best. So I'd say overall she's decent. If you need a water unit, she's still pretty good, but not the best. Next we've got Asta, the main Black Clover unit, and he's actually pretty good. He is hybrid and a cone AoE, very good for damage, just pure damage. He has no passive or anything, but he is still a meta hill just because he is very strong. If you need a dark unit, he is a pretty good option. Next we've got Julius, which is very underrated in my opinion. He did recently get changed, so instead of having the stun passive, he's going to have a time stop, which I think stuns them for 20 seconds, which is crazy. I think he's very good as a support now, and I think he is a meta hill unit. Probably the top right now. I really like Julius. He's a full AoE light unit with the time stop, so he's pretty cheap as well, can be used in all game mode. Soto is a 4 placement nature unit. They can have either the stun or cripple passive as certain upgrades. He also has an ability called Boogie Woogie, which is pretty much a bootleg version of Law, teleporting enemies in his range back to the spawn, which does include flying enemies as well, even though his drawback is he can only hit ground. So he's a meta ground unit, mostly support oriented. He is a nature unit, so he's a pretty good option for that. If you need one for caverns, he's pretty good and he's pretty cheap. Itadori is a 3 placement fire unit. He does get hybrid at a pretty late upgrade, and he doesn't have a passive or anything, but he does have a special 100% extra crit chance and some bonus crit damage on his final attack, which can lead to some pretty crazy damage. Overall, I'd say he is a meta hill, but he's pretty expensive to get there, so I'd say he kinda is between a meta ground and meta hill, but he is really good once you have him maxed out. Akari is a pretty cheap nature unit who, similar to Itadori, does not have a passive, but does have a stat boost giving him 777% extra crit damage, which can lead to some pretty hefty numbers. So I say he's a meta hill unit. He is hybrid, and his damage is actually really strong, even stronger than Itadori. Megami is a hybrid unit with damage that is on par with Noelle's, but he's more support oriented with up to 3 passives, Bleed, Cripple, and Electrified, and an ability that summons Maharaga to do 72 million damage at level 1 with no skill tree. So he's pretty good. I'd say he's amazing. His damage is kind of lacking though, but he is a great support. Shadow Sukuna is pretty much just another version of Megami, but he is a lot more expensive and can do a lot more damage. The godly version of Sukuna is a monster in infinites, but he costs around 3 million to max, so he's really only usable in infinites. He does buff your team by 35% range, so 35% range buff is his godly bonus, and then he also has the dismantle passive and 2 abilities which are 2 different types of nukes. Overall, this guy has some of the highest damage in the game. I think actually besides Pride with the damage buff, the highest damage in the game. He definitely is a meta hill unit, but only in infinites. Ultimate Gojo is another crazy hybrid unit that came with the JJK update. He is a light element unit with 2 abilities, both a time stop and a nuke, and then he also has a bubble around him that slows down enemies who walk through it. He does some pretty good damage as well. I'd say he is probably the best support in the game right now, and in terms of overall meta, I'd put him under Sukuna, but outside of Infinite, above Sukuna as well. I don't know. They're both very, very valuable, and Gojo, very strong. Aizen is a light circle AoE hybrid stun unit. He's amazing for stun and some pretty good damage, but I don't know. He's not the best anymore, not among the top of the top. Next we've got Meliodas, which I think is decent. He does some pretty good hybrid dark damage, but he doesn't have a passive or anything crazy about him. I'm going to start speeding through the remaining units because I've already talked about them in a previous tier list video. Joker, I'd say, is amazing. He does some really good ground damage and has the dismantled passive, but isn't too strong anymore. Ulquiorra, he's probably going to be also an amazing, probably right about here. He's good for hybrid. Next, Pride, we know this guy's crazy. Full AoE, burn, team buff, I don't know, just crazy damage. He also has some cool passive where he gains damage every wave for 15 waves. Very, very strong. Griffith, he's probably top of decent. There's kind of better options for the slow passive that he has. Shark Ninja is not a better option for the slow passive, he's actually a worse option. He does have slow, he's only ground, and he's line AoE. His damage is getting outdated. Shadow Tanker, I think, is still pretty good. I'd say he's at least top of decent or bottom of amazing. Depends, because he's very good for Fire Caverns if you have the right trait. Full AoE, hybrid, cripple on placement. Next we have Benimaru, which I think is a meta heal unit, and because he's more reliable for early airs, I'd say he's probably right about here. Better than these units as a heal. Pain is going to be probably either top of decent or bottom of amazing. I mean, he's better than Griffith for full AoE slow. Because he is probably more valuable for leaderboard runs now, I'd say he's probably at least, maybe even like right about here. Division Vice Captain, he is good for light damage. He is an early hybrid option that's very cheap. He just doesn't have really anything special about him besides bleed on his first few upgrades. I don't know. He's pretty good. I like using him sometimes, but I wouldn't say he's too great anymore. Division Captain is too expensive and not too strong compared to the new damage numbers we have today, so I'd say she's probably around here. Kafka. Kafka is definitely meta ground. He does some crazy damage. He is just very expensive. Rengoku is probably meta hill. He's just going to be mostly usable in Nature Caverns and Hogtown. He does some really good fire damage, but there are some better hill options. Tatsumaki, I'd say, is probably top of amazing. I'd say she's better than Yuno because she is immediately available to place. She's only 450 cost, she's a lot cheaper, and has slow on placement. Nezuko, I'd say, is probably top of decent. She's full AoE, burn, and bleed, does some pretty crazy damage if you have the right trait, and is good for fire. If you don't have glitched on her though, she's not too crazy, just decent. Itachi, I'd say same thing. Very good for some certain caverns, but with the Black Flames passive, he can also do some crazy damage. You just need to have a good trait on him, otherwise he's just only decent. Blue Admiral, I'd say, is also only decent. Because of infinites and leaderboards, he is now a little bit more valuable for freeze if you want to go that way. Otherwise, I don't know, he's getting really outdated. He's full AoE hybrid freeze. Grand Green Witch is going to be a stun support unit. I'd say she's probably about here. I don't know, there are better options for stun. Law is still amazing. Meta heal for sure. He does some crazy damage and also has the room ability, which is even more valuable with leaderboard runs. I'd say he's probably even like more valuable than these guys because, yeah, leaderboard runs, you need this guy. Very, very important. Sun Shinmu, I'd say, is also meta. He does some crazy damage, especially in infinites now. With the leaderboards, he's even more valuable. Probably, I'd say, right about here. He also has the cripple passive, which is really good. Shadow, I'd say, is kind of falling off. His nuke is really good still for progressive stages. I'd say he is amazing. Probably right about here. Guts, I'd say, is still probably meta hill, although he's getting a little bit outdated. He does some crazy damage, and he even has a soul that is mostly for him. Next we have Heavenly Chad, which I think is decent, and towards the bottom of it, he can be used as like a support with his time stop for players that are trying to get into leaderboard, but his damage and pretty much everything about him is just kind of outdated. Doflamingo, also outdated. Probably still better than Heavenly Chad though. He is a full AoE hybrid fear unit, but there are better options for fear. Ichigo. Shanks is still going to be meta. I think he is crazy for infinite still. He's full AoE hybrid and has the stun plus Conqueror's damage passive. Saitama's getting a little bit outdated because Shadow is in the game and you can trade for him now. I'd say his damage is still probably towards the top of decent, maybe right about here. He does have his nuke and full AoE damage. Skull Knight is also kind of getting a little bit outdated. I'd say he's still probably bottom of amazing. He has full AoE and hybrid and pretty crazy damage, but nothing special about him. Garo is probably still bottom of meta hill. He's a great option for cripple early game and the water damage for fire caverns. Then Freerun is also meta hill, so I'll throw her up here too. I'd say she's probably right about here. Moved some stuff around, made some finishing touches, and this is probably the final list. I know it's a little bit weird and I didn't talk too much about every unit this time, but I wanted to go in depth on mainly the JJK and Black Clover units I've never talked about before on this channel, at least in a tier list video. And every other unit you can kind of find in other previous videos on tier list where you can kind of see how they were before with better explanations for them. But yeah, this is my final list. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Of course, it is entirely my opinion, and I'd like to hear what yours is as well. Anyways, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Hope to see you in the next one. Have a great day.